Good afternoon again, everyone. As you just heard, I'm Scott Bergmann, Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at CTIA, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our final panel of the day, Washington Talks Wireless, Perspectives from Policymaker Advisors. I think throughout the day, we've heard about how 5G networks are really taking shape, stretching across the country, driven by record levels of private investment. Speeds are up, prices are down, consumers are sharing record levels of data. The industry is delivering new services like fixed wireless access that are connecting consumers and bringing competition. And on this panel, we really get to talk about how the decisions of the FCC and NTIA have the potential to accelerate those trends. So we're joined by 5 spectacular advisors who sit square in the middle of the most important and I think most interesting policy debates, focused on spectrum availability, policies to bridge the digital divide, promotes public safety, consumer protection, and a host of other issues that really are key to how our industry grows and how we meet the needs of our consumers. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Maybe you guys could just give a wave or something when I do. Erin Boone. Erin is legal advisor to FCC Commissioner Nathan Simington. Jonathan Campbell. Jonathan is legal advisor for FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel. Shiva Goel. Shiva is legal advisor to FCC Commissioner Geoffrey Starks. Phil Murphy. Phil is Senior Advisor to NTIA Administrator Alan Davidson. And last but not least, Greg Watson. Greg is Policy Advisor to FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Thank you guys so much for being here. Really appreciate it. We're going to start with an issue that's always at the top of our members' priority lists. That's spectrum. And as we look at the end of the year, there are really several significant items that are coming down the pike that are going to impact spectrum availability. On the domestic side, NTIA, as we just heard, is working on the National Spectrum Strategy. And from an international perspective, the World Radio Communications Conference will gather in Dubai in just 2 months to lay the groundwork for spectrum availability internationally. Phil, I think maybe I'll start with you. I've been joking with you. We'd love it if you'd go through a section-by-section analysis of the report. But if not that, maybe is there something that surprised you as you've worked through the process, either an area of consensus or an area of conflict?
Well, I mean, first of all, I just associate myself with the really in-depth and insightful remarks of my colleagues, Scott Harris and Sean Spivey, and there's other folks from NTI here who've been participating and talking about some of these topics. I think the thing that is the most startling to me is the way federal agencies think about spectrum and the way that their thinking has shifted. Increasingly, federal agencies view spectrum as a resource that they want to use, a platform that they want to innovate on. And federal agencies, I think there's this narrative, right, that the federal government doesn't use spectrum efficiently, that they have these very wasteful systems, right, and that there's sort of vast amounts of fallow spectrum. And I think one of the things that we've certainly found is that that's just not the case, right? I think as we talk to different federal agencies and really dig into their use of a lot of these bands, it is intensive. They have cutting edge applications. These applications are important to a range of missions that are really critical to the US government, to our national security, to our ability to continue to innovate and make scientific discoveries, to public safety, a huge range of things. And I think, they aren't just thinking about how do we keep these capabilities, right? Like everyone else, they're thinking, how do we innovate, right? How do we move to the next level of technological innovation? And in a lot of cases, how do we stay one step ahead of our adversaries? And so I think the kind of corollary to that is what are the incentives, right, that we can use to get federal agencies to come to the table? And the real challenge is we need better incentives, right? I think the current structure for the Commercial Spectrum Enhancement Act, which allows federal agencies to get compensated for relocating, really only replaces what they have with a like capacity or comparable capability. And I think as we're looking at, as one person at DoD described to me, who wants to trade a Chevy in for a Chevy? They want something more out of this process, and I think we're trying to work with them and other stakeholders to figure out what's a way that we can create a better paradigm that provides stronger incentive to federal agencies to come to the table, because this is not getting any easier.
Jonathan, maybe I'll look to you on the global side. We obviously have an international strategy in development as we get ready for work in Dubai. Chairwoman Rosenworcel has really been, I think, a powerful voice for the need for future study of bands above 7 gigahertz. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the FCC thinks about spectrum bands that should be studied internationally, globally, and the importance of both?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to echo the appreciation that I think a lot of folks have said today for the work from Phil, Scott, and Sean on the national spectrum strategy. You know, coming up with like any form of long-term planning is difficult, and when you have to do it across the whole of government, that is a huge challenge. And so we're at the FCC looking forward to working on next steps on the national spectrum strategy. And we're also mindful of, you know, while that is a strategy for all of government and ways to refill the spectrum pipeline for a variety of different uses, that we aren't, you know, waiting around, that we're going to move forward in the near term to try to take action and to fill up the spectrum pipeline where we can. And so the FCC has been pushing forward on a lot of initiatives to do just that. We've got the 12 gigahertz proceeding, which is looking at a variety of different uses there. In particular, 550 megahertz for flexible use licenses. We have proceedings on 6 gigahertz, where we're looking at you know, double down on the innovation that we have in unlicensed, and 42 gigahertz. And one of the ones that I'm particularly intrigued by is how do we get dedicated spectrum for UAS, and one just last week, space launch. I mean, to talk to Phil's point, like, that's a wide variety of uses for spectrum, and so we're working in the near term to try to address that. But I think that underscores some of the challenges that come along with planning and as well as near-term action. A couple of the other ways that we're trying to take some action in the near term is, and to going to WRC, the U.S. needs to you know, show leadership in harmonization of our spectrum bands and the use globally, and to really drum up support. And I think coming out of CTIL and going into this final sprint into WRC, we have some strong positions on the 3 gigahertz band and the 6 gigahertz band, which really is about bolstering our investment in mobile in 3 gigahertz and in unlicensed in 6 gigahertz, and taking that strong message to WRC. And then finally, we're getting the agency ready to think about some of these tougher questions that are going to come up as far as long-term planning. And back in April, we adopted a spectrum policy statement, which sets out a variety of different principles about how the FCC is going to be looking at spectrum issues going forward, and really recognizing that it's an environment more and more where we have to be realistic about interference, and interference is going to be a two-way street in how we address that, both with receivers and transmitters. And so I think that's very much establishes the lens that as these long-term plans start becoming near-term plans, how we're going to view things going forward. As for WRC and long-term planning there, the update is coming out of CTIL. There's a regional position on a variety of different bands for IMT use or mobile use. And a few of them are in that sweet spot that the chairwoman has talked about between 7 and 16. And so right now, I think the task is for the U.S. and the delegation that has been working incredibly hard in preparation for CTIL and going into WRC to think about what is the best path forward as far as you know, the economic benefit for the United States, showing global leadership, and you know, making sure our national security concerns are represented. And frankly, I think the delegation is up for it. They barely have time to unpack their suitcase these days, and we just sent them back out to Geneva. So I think they're up for the task.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, Erin, Shiva, Greg, I imagine your bosses are watching these developments, and just curious, as you think about either the national spectrum strategy or work, is there some element, something that you think is really important for a successful strategy, for a successful World Radio Conference? I think give you guys each a shot.
You want to start with?
Sure, Erin, you want to start?
Okay. So, I mean, I'm going to parrot a lot of what Jonathan and others have said here, but I think a successful spectrum strategy is one in which federal agencies commit to exploring ways for spectrum to be used more efficiently going forward with an eye towards global harmonization. And many here probably know well that my boss is committed to receiver reforms as part of that process. But beyond that, while the US has its own unique issues, as we saw with the C-band fight, I think it's the necessity of global spectrum harmonization will only become more crucial going forward. And because I think the evolutionary path of technology, it's pretty clear that everything is going wireless, and so it's just going to be more and more crucial. And so I think as a result, global policymakers will need to ensure that spectrum is we allow for it to be used more efficiently, that any of the gains that we make in that efficiency doesn't squelch innovation.
Shiva, anything on your boss's checklist?
Yeah, not a ton to add here. I do think one thing we'd want to put on the radar, and I know this is not lost on folks like Phil and Scott and Sean at NTIA, is, cost really ought to be a consideration when you're coming up with a spectrum strategy. If you've got excess scarcity on the input, what does that mean for the output? I think, the answer tends to be pretty predictable. What does it mean for competition, which again is a driver of cost, right? Commissioner Starks firmly believes in a future where America's innovative, but also where the fruits of that innovation are accessible to everybody. And that's sort of another factor and ingredient that militates in favor of more rather than less. I think speed is another, speaking sort of generally here, right? You got to identify a lot of spectrum, and then you have to find a way to get it out quickly. And there are so many different ways to address a band. Doing something fast rather than slow is super important when you consider the lead time here. Once you identify a band to the point where you've got silicon, you've got devices on the street, that can take a really long time. And if you're doing that when there's a crunch, you're way too late, right? And you're also making the country less capable of withstanding a shock. And we don't need a better example than 2020 and 2021, where our networks, including wireless networks, had a surge in demand and a shift in demand, right? And they stood strong. And that's not necessarily going to be as easy when you're in you've got less of a glut than you did right as networks were upgrading to 5G and doing a whole bunch of things to become more efficient. So just two things I'd sort of put on the map here.
Yeah, spectrum is so key to meeting that demand. So we've got harmonization and speed. Greg, anything from your boss's perspective that you're looking for?
Yeah, I just want to say at the outset, it's important that I recognize that I feel like I've got very good and strong working relationships with all of the advisors here. People get wrapped up into there's a lot of partisan rancor in DC, and people are hotly divided. Totally get that. I will say this: what has been made abundantly clear to me sitting here right now is that Republican advisors are very firm on no socks. And the
It's a
Democratic
good thing I didn't put socks
advisors are apparently sock people. So
You told me to take off my tie. You didn't say a thing about socks, Greg.
yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, so I won't spend too much time on it. But I do think jumping off of Shiva's point, I think in terms of speed and how long it takes to sort of reallocate and make bands available, I think it can take upwards of 6 years at times to free up some of these spectrum resources to the commercial industry when wrangling away from federal users. And so that really sort of emphasizes the point to move on this. I was pleased to hear Scott's remarks earlier, and I mentioned to Phil, one thing that in particular I was happy to hear was that there are going to be an implementation plan that would come along with sort of the strategy, because in my mind that's sort of how you get from a broad high-level strategy document to how do we actually get this done. And as we think about what are the things we actually should get done, I think to me it starts with looking at, well, where's our spectrum pipeline currently? There is, the cupboards are bare, and so it would make sense in my mind to start with, or through this implementation plan, move towards identifying bands that can be either freed up for licensed or unlicensed or for other purposes. So yeah, pleased to hear there's an implementation plan, and I think obviously it's important that we have a strong sort of action-oriented item on the strategy and as well on the work front as well. We need to be very clear-eyed about how do we advance U.S. leadership in wireless. It's a really difficult challenge that we're up against right now. I think China's very sophisticated. They're very powerful in these international bodies, and so we've got to go in putting our best foot forward, be very clear-eyed about what are our goals and how do we achieve them.
Thanks, Greg. And that's a great transition. I appreciate that multiple of you focused on mid-band spectrum, which is obviously a key priority for our industry. We see it both in terms of the projected deficit, and some of the earlier panels really laid out the scale of the deficit as we see consumer demand growing. And then, Greg, to your point, as we see the other countries around the globe that we sort of vie with for wireless leadership, investing in mid-band spectrum, we really want to see that happen here in the U.S. as well, too. Jonathan, maybe I'll turn to you. Chairwoman Rosenworcel has talked a lot about the need for more mid-band spectrum, but we have this unprecedented lapse in auction authority. I'm wondering if you can give our audience some guidance on how do we break that logjam, how do we get auction authority back and move forward on these bands?
I wish I had an easy answer, because then it would have been done by now. But I think, again, echoing the point that I made earlier, one of the things that we are doing is we're not waiting around. We're making movement where we can. 12 gigahertz is an example of that. That's about getting rules and policies in place so that once auction authority is in place, we can move quickly on an auction. 3.1 to 3.45 is one in which we do have spectrum auction authority for, separate from our general auction authority. And I've heard it come up on multiple panels today. It's clearly of high importance to industry stakeholders. And we've got a congressional mandate to auction the identified spectrum. And so we are, we've been participating in the PATS process, and we are ready to take the next steps with NTIA and DoD on moving forward with an auction of spectrum identified through that process. So, not waiting around, we're trying to be proactive. On auction authority, I think there's been a lot of discussion today about the benefits of the FCC's auctions program. And so I'm not going to repeat much of that. It's essential for global competitiveness to making sure that the industry can continue to build and grow and innovate. But I do just want to take a minute. I've had the true pleasure of being at the front row of auctions for most of my career. I started at the FCC working on the broadcast incentive auction. I've worked on 7 spectrum auctions in total, including a second incentive auction. And that's not to mention, media auctions and other things that we also can't hold because we don't have auction authority. And I'm truly a believer at how auctions can be a problem solver. And really at the core of that is we have a world-leading auctions team, spectrum and auctions team between WTB and OEA at the FCC. And I marvel at how they throw themselves at problems, are able to come up with solutions to some of our most challenging spectrum issues, and they've done it time and again through a variety of different auctions. And it's time to get them off the sidelines. Like let's get them back to work. They are great at innovating, so let's let them innovate and get our auction authority back as soon as possible. But the last point I just want to make on auction authority is I think a lot of us, there's been a lot of talk about some of the bigger bands and big Herculean efforts that we've had with auctions, like C-band and 3.45 and things like that, where it was large repurposing efforts. Let's not lose the importance in the important role in important but incremental steps that the auctions program can play. And someone on the last panel, I think it was Will Johnson, stole this from me. Shout out Will. The FCC has 5G capable licenses in our inventory right now. I'm still workshopping a better name than inventory auction. 5G capable licenses in our inventory right now that we can get out there and into the wireless ecosystem to really, benefit consumers and businesses. And so, that is it a, splashy as a huge piece of midband spectrum? No, but it's important. And it's about, filling in those gaps in coverage. It's about bringing the services to people who don't currently have them. And so, let's not forget the small things that Spectrum Auction Authority can accomplish.
Thanks. I suspect Will may loan that to you if you'd like to run with it. So, I can't help but ask, Phil, I particularly think about you with your experience on the Hill at NTIA, maybe Greg, you've obviously been on the Hill and in the administration as well too. How do you guys think about Auction Authority expiring? What's different this time? How have Spectrum debates changed as you've been watching it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to recognize it has changed, right? And I think, there's a reason why Auction Authority hadn't expired previously, and I think it was because there was a sense, right, that this was a priority, but also there was a sense that other committees were not as sort of committed to what happened with federal spectrum, right? And I think what you're seeing is a shift in the dynamic among the other committees that have jurisdiction over other agencies, particularly the Armed Services Committees, as they're thinking about what impact a repurposing could have on, those federal agencies' operations and equities. And, as I said before, I think this is a challenge that is only going to get harder with time as there's fewer greenfield opportunities, right, to really open up large bands. More of these bands are sort of crowded with federal systems. The systems are more critical to operations of the United States and these various sort of major missions. And you can see that these committees are really asserting themselves in a way that they haven't historically, and I think it's clearly making things more challenging. But that being said, I think the way that we have been successful at doing this in the past, right, is having a strong auction process, having strong incentives for federal agencies, and really having a robust process in place historically that can make sure that federal agencies are whole at the end of a reallocation. And I think to some extent, some of those processes broke down over the past few years, potentially in the previous administration. And I think we've been
on call.
But I think we've been working really hard, I think, to rebuild trust and to sort of get back to regular order. And in my sense, federal agencies see that as reassuring, right? They believe in the process. And so I think the extent to which we can really do things like put together the national spectrum strategy, where they can have a real opportunity to see, hey, these are the bands that are in the pipeline. We're going to do a real fulsome study to understand what's possible here, right? We're going to give you an opportunity to escalate your concerns all the way up to the White House so that the administration is really making a cohesive decision here. I think from our perspective, being able to do that in a way that sort of, as Scott describes, brings in a lot of this different input, right? It puts it through a really robust process, and then it results in an administrative decision. To my mind, that can really help to make it easier to move this thing through, because agencies don't feel the need to go to their committees. They don't feel the need to sort of scream bloody murder, right? They're like, you know what? We have confidence in the process. We understand what the outcome's likely going to be, and we can make plans, right, to leverage against that. And so in my mind, that's the thing that we're trying to do, and I think the strategy will sort of help start to assuage folks' concerns. And I think hopefully that can be a piece to sort of unlocking the morass that we're seeing on the Hill.
Yeah, two things I want to get on the record here. One, Phil, when you and I were on the Hill at the same time together, Auction Authority never lapsed. So what's changed?
I know, yeah, it's fair.
I mean, come on.
It's fair.
Second point, I have to defend the previous administration's record on spectrum here after a shot across the bow. Because we hear this a lot where it's like, maybe spectrum processes and negotiations, it got a little haywire, or maybe it got, crossed in the last administration. But I always counter that with, look at the results of, freeing up thousands of megahertz for unlicensed, and more importantly, freeing up hundreds of megahertz for licensed spectrum. And so, we can we can say, let's look at the outcomes, and I think, we'll stand by sort of our record on freeing that spectrum up. But, jumping off of Phil's point about, it is more challenging, I totally agree with that. My view on this is, this really emphasizes the need to keep the spectrum pipeline full. It feels like spectrum policy has very much become a zero-sum game, and to some extent, it's always been a little bit of that. You've got your different constituencies and stakeholders who care about their various outcomes. All of that makes sense. Everyone is becoming more and more, forthright in sort of defending their spectrum turf. All of that makes sense. But to me, it really emphasizes the need to make sure that we have the spectrum pipeline full so that there's not so much pressure on each individual decision. Not that there's, ever trade-offs or anything like that, but, when you've got sort of other opportunities where you can say, hey, we have an opportunity to get a spectrum win over here, there's a different spectrum win over here, right? There's more opportunities making more spectrum available, I think could relieve a little bit of the pressure, but obviously that's not the only answer here, and I think there's, a longer-term sort of think about how do we continue to work effectively on this.
Thank you both for that perspective. Erin, I was hoping maybe to pivot a little bit to another topic that gets raised a lot when we're thinking about spectrum policy, that's spectrum sharing. And that's been defined in a couple of different ways, right, in different contexts. It obviously can involve frequency-based, geographic, time-based coordination. How does your boss think about spectrum sharing? Certainly welcome anyone else's perspective, but Erin, to start with you. Particularly one of the things we think about is how do you continue to enable the wide area, high power network deployments that have that broad coverage that Americans rely on. Curious how the commissioner thinks about spectrum sharing and the role that it might play.
Yeah, so I would say that the commissioner thinks that, sharing definitely is going to be part of the future and that it's going to be very important and more necessary as we move forward to this world where everything is wireless. But at least in the short term, he has oftentimes expressed concern that, especially with 5G networks, that it should play a secondary role to exclusive use. And 'cause he believes that in order to build and expand the robust networks that have the capacity and the speed that's necessary for advanced 5G technologies to thrive, that we need to be able to, to make exclusive use licenses available, and that availability needs to be without the risk of harmful interference. So until we can demonstrate that sharing works on a broad scale in a congested environment, and I think we'll get the opportunity to do that with the 6 gigahertz band here pretty soon, I think we probably need to steer away from dedicating all future spectrum allocations to a sharing model. And I know there's a large contingency out there that would agree that the jury might still be out on whether the 6 gigahertz band is successful and whether or not the incumbents in that band will actually be protected. So I think we need to proceed, and my boss would second this, that we should proceed cautiously.
Well, okay, I know we can talk spectrum all day, but I did want to touch a little bit on digital divide issues. I know this has been really important for the FCC. It's been important for NTIA. Maybe a natural place to start is the Affordable Connectivity Program. The FCC's implementation has now, I think it's 21 million subscribers. Jonathan, I thought maybe I'd start with you. What do you see as the strengths of the program, and how do we think about signing folks up as it's a finite amount of funds that are going to expire at some point next year?
So, I think you hit on one of the strengths right at the top. That's 21 million households that got connected and are staying connected as a result of this program, and that's absolutely huge. But drawing from actually a personal experience I had recently, I had the opportunity to go with the chairwoman to Starks country. I went to Johnson County, Kansas. And we went to a library there in which there was ESL teachers who were getting trained up on ACP outreach education, how to help folks get signed up. And then there was a fantastic conversation between the chairwoman the Secretary of Education and a couple of superintendents from local school districts about the impact that the ACP program has had and how connectivity for students is an absolute must. And what kept coming up in those two conversations was how a good idea can spread so quickly, and how there's been a lot of outreach efforts, and the FCC has been issuing grants on outreach efforts, but really they keep coming back to how it was trusted community members who were helping each other spread the word, get signed up. It was teachers, it was coaches, it was fellow students, it was parents that were really letting each other know and supporting each other in their efforts to get signed up for ACP. And so I think that speaks volumes about the strength of the program. And I remain optimistic that Congress is going to continue funding it and keep this really important benefit going.
Shiva, maybe I'll turn to you. Commissioner Starks obviously spent a lot of time spreading the word about the ACP. How important is the effort to secure additional funding?
Yeah, I mean, look, I echo Jonathan's remarks here. What I would say is you got to look at the benefit to the household, and then you have to look at the benefit to the country, and they're both huge, right? So what's the benefit to the household? Jonathan said it, right? Get online and stay online. Both extremely important. If you focus on the stay online part for just a minute, think about when broadband is most useful. It's most useful at those times when a family is going through something where a broadband connection's on the chopping block, a job loss, a health scare, right? That is exactly when you want to keep folks connected, right? Commissioner Starks talked about visiting a public housing facility in Reno, and the housing authority there, one of the reasons they were so excited about ACP, one was they were signing up a lot of non-adopters, right? But also there was a real synergy, a real dovetail with their workforce services, which tends to be the biggest, most significant category of resident services they provide, right? And they were talking about Reno's economy growing 30% year over year, new employers coming in. Well, a lot of those new employment opportunities needed either permanent remote work or partial remote work. You had to have that capability just to be in the ballgame. And that's exactly what ACP can do, right? And you've got studies showing higher earnings on average that outstrip the amount of the subsidy. It's super, super valuable. Let's pivot just for a minute to the broader benefits here of the program, right? We talked about the higher earnings for the household that signed up. There are also lower healthcare costs if they can access telehealth. We know that telehealth visits on average tend to cost less, right? We know that those savings aren't just savings to the individual, they're savings to the insurer, including the public insurer. They're savings to everybody else who buys into the system sort of across the board. And then more fundamentally, right, if you think about where our economy's heading, it is not just going to be folks who make things in an office that need to know how to use these, that need to know how to use computers. It's going to be folks who are making things with their hands. It's going to be everybody. The percentage of employment opportunities that will require advanced digital skills, by the end of this decade is going to be vast majority. So what does that mean? A connected workforce is a competitive one. It's extremely, extremely important for, not just equity and doing right by folks who are struggling. It is just important for our future as an economy here.
Really appreciate that, Shiva. And I know we in the wireless industry are really proud that over half of the ACP subscribers have chosen wireless services, which is maybe a natural pivot point, Phil, to NTIA's role. Obviously, NTIA announced its allocations for the historic BEAD funding earlier this summer. We're starting to see states make their initial decisions now. One of the things, I think you probably heard from CTIA about this, is we really value technological neutrality. Believe that fixed wireless can play a big role, that there are spillover effects for mobile services in unserved and underserved areas. I'm curious about how you see the state process unfolding, and if there are different views on the role of wireless, how do you see that flexibility factoring into the overall success of the program?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I'd just say is, echo Shiva and Jonathan's comments about ACP. I mean, we see it as also really essential to our program and ensuring, right, that not only does everyone have access to high-speed, reliable, affordable internet service, but they can get online, and the ACP will be critical to do that. I think we've been saying sort of all along that we think that fixed wireless is going to be sort of a vital part of the BEAD program, right? Just I think based on the numbers alone, right, there are going to be far too many locations in the country that are unserved that it will not be financially feasible to deploy fiber to. And we've designed the program to reflect that. So states are working on developing their extremely high cost threshold where they'll be looking at non-fiber solutions. And different states are approaching that challenge differently, but I think we've been very clear with them, particularly for states that have a lot of complex topographic challenges and a lot of unserved locations. They're going to need to absolutely be thinking about fixed wireless as a part of that. And so, that's an element I would say that we've been very clear with folks about. Another thing that we're starting to see in the initial proposals is that states are being flexible about how they're implementing this program. And, we see states that are adding extra points, essentially, for providers that, in addition to providing service to a home, are also setting up mobile connectivity as well. And I think for us, we sort of see that as being sort of foundational, that deploying this fiber technology to a lot of parts of the country is really going to enable, I think, mobile deployment in a way that has been really challenging, right? Getting backhaul to these locations is one of the main challenges that's preventing them from getting wireless service in the first place. And so, we really look at BEAD not just sort of facilitating the deployment of mobile directly through the program, but also as like an ancillary impact of all the infrastructure that we're deploying. And, there are these open access commitments that are part of the middle mile deployment that BEAD networks will be making. And so, we see this as a real opportunity, not just for folks to be able to deploy additional wireless service, but to be honest, potentially for additional competition as well, because getting access to that backhaul can be a challenge in the first place. So I think we're really optimistic that sort of in all phases of the BEAD program, we're thinking about the critical role that wireless will play. And I think we're really excited about, the impact that this program is going to have on communities and the ability to drive high-speed wireless service, I think, to a lot of folks that don't have it.
That's great. Thanks, Phil. Erin, I know that Commissioner Simington has talked a lot about the benefits of technological neutrality in broadband programs. Any perspective you'd want to share there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the commissioner would say that it only makes sense to deploy the most efficient technology that's available in a given area. And I mean, we're seeing enormous investment in fixed wireless and satellite service very recently. And, these services are providing speeds and reliability that rival fixed services. And for rural areas and other areas that are challenging to serve for whatever reason, such as, it's mountainous, if it's outlying, and or if there's smaller population density, fixed wireless and satellite are a logical choice, and I think will enable BEAD dollars to go a lot further.
Greg, I can't help but thinking about you and your boss when it comes to, a historic investment, and your boss is focused a lot on siting and how do we make deployments go faster. Are there any insights that you might share as we get ready for this $42.5 billion to flow out into networks?
Yeah, one of my favorite analogies by Commissioner Carr is he talks about the winning strategy to advance 5G. This is the winning playbook for 5G, okay? Think about like a wooden stool, right, with 3 legs. On the first leg, it's more spectrum. The second leg is more telecom workforce. And the third leg, can you guess it?
Going to go with siting.
Permitting reform. That's the winning playbook. So I think in the BEAD context, this is it's been really encouraging to see, particularly on a bipartisan basis calls for reforms to sort of our siting and permitting process, particularly on federal lands. Look, there's a lot of different permitting reform ideas out there. Not all of them can get consensus support, and that's fine. But I think it's been great to see, again, on this strong bipartisan basis. I think it was sometime October, November of last year, but there was a letter from Senators Barrasso and Senator Lujan, and I think it was to you guys, maybe, Phil, over at NTIA or the Biden administration broadly, but essentially pointing to continued delays in permitting on federal lands. This is something that we've tried to address in a lot of different ways over the years. I think Phil, you would agree with this. You guys are continuing to try to wrangle the agencies, but it's not an easy process. So, I think to the extent that we can make additional progress there, at least in the federal lands context, right? Again, given the broad bipartisan consensus, that would be great. And beyond that, we'd love to see additional permitting reforms beyond that.
I mean, I would just say this is a major priority for us, and we've hired a team of folks that are working on, not just the federal permitting issues, but NEPA and historical review issues as well. And we're working in regular and close coordination with those federal land management agencies. And we absolutely recognize that permitting can create delays that I think from our perspective aren't going to be acceptable. So it's a major priority for us, and I think as Greg said, it's certainly something of bipartisan interest.
Jonathan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about another FCC initiative. The commission just voted and launched a new proceeding on the 5G fund last week. Could you talk just for a minute about how that fits into the overall effort to get everyone connected?
Sure, happy to. So, I think we made the right choice in 2020 when we decided to wait on moving forward with the 5G fund until we had the new maps in place. And now with those in place in each iteration, it's benefiting the BEAD program. It's something that we're going to draw upon from 5G fund as well. We are able to put out some really interesting ideas about how best to go about the fund and to target funding to where people live, work, and travel. It's fascinating, really detailed information, and so we're looking forward to folks. If you haven't heard, there's an FNPRM that we just adopted a week ago, and so you should definitely comment on that. But I think it's important because it fits in with BEAD and some of the other major funding projects, because I think as folks have heard throughout this conference, there's the possibility that it can be a new solution for in-home broadband. But on top of that, it goes back to old school coverage. And it's about the importance of being connected when you're outside the home and you need to have that vital connection to emergency services. And hopefully, that's not going to be the usual case, but also like just being able to connect with your family and friends and wherever you go, wherever you live, work, and travel. It's like an overlay on top of a lot of the other funding projects that are going on right now. And I just want to echo Phil's point. I think folks are mindful of where there are synergies between BEAD funding, the challenges with backhaul, and how that can play a role in more robust coverage through the 5G fund.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, look, we're down to the last 2 minutes. So maybe, we've covered so many important spectrum issues, so many important digital divide issues. There are a score of other issues that you all work on every day that impact the wireless industry, wireless consumers. I'm wondering if you guys can, 30 seconds, give us one issue that we didn't talk about today that you want on folks' radar. And Greg, maybe I'll start with you down the end and we can kind of work down towards Erin.
Yeah, I think, look, there's an elephant in the room, right? I think the FCC today put forward a very, concerning, from our perspective, proposal to reimpose heavy-handed Title II net neutrality rules over the internet. I think, as we've heard a lot today about, the historic trends in investment, all the benefits of 5G that consumers are seeing, right, the tremendous growth, I think, we're very concerned that, reimposing these rules could actually chill a lot of that investment, could, have negative impacts on consumers, and so it's something that we're very concerned with ourselves.
I would just say, I think from NTIA's perspective, we're in the midst of, a number of these really major initiatives. And the thing that I think is really important to us is to hear from you all, right? I think, you all work for and represent, many of the companies that are going to be engaging in our programs. We have an open door. We want to sort of meet with folks. We want to understand issues as these programs are rolling out, whether it's National Spectrum Strategy, whether it's BEAD, whether it's one of our other broadband programs. I can't tell you the number of novel issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it's critical, I think, to hear from folks in industry about how these challenges are impacting you. And so I would say we have an open door. Please feel free to reach out to us. We want to hear from you about how these programs are working for you, because I think the success of these programs will depend on your ability to successfully interact with them and ultimately to serve folks with affordable, high-speed, reliable broadband service.
So I really want to extend our appreciation. One of the things that is a big priority for the chairwoman is implementation of the Safe Connections Act. And the FCC is busy working on that, but just extend appreciation for the important work that CTIA has been doing and partnering with the National Domestic Violence Hotline folks to ensure that, our phones are so important in every facet of our life. They're particularly in emergencies, as I mentioned, with 5G fund, it can be an absolute game changer as far as being able to reach support, being able to reach help. And so the work that CTIA has done with the hotline to ensure that when folks are calling to get off family plans and to get off of and to change their wireless plans, that if they're in need of help, they can find that voice on the end. And just lastly, I just wanted to note that as far as the big policy that was announced today, I'll just say briefly, I think it confirms what we all know from the last couple of years, which is broadband is essential. And it is an incredibly important facet of all of our lives, and we need policies that reflect that.
I wouldn't call this an issue, but I'll tell you something I sort of pay attention to, and that is what convergence means in wireless. Wireless, wireline, wireline, wireless, right? It's going both ways, satellite, terrestrial, even within wireless, right? The radio access network, or at least interest in seeing the RAN collapse or merge or speak well with or interoperate with the local. And when does it become something that is less about making customers stickier across affiliated businesses? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but when does it become something that truly makes life easier and cheaper for the consumer and for folks who are trying to solve a problem with connectivity? That's something we're certainly paying attention to.
Erin, you get the last word.
All right. I think my boss has been focused recently on, particularly on edge device security. He believes that security is going to only continue to become a brewing problem, given that everything is moving to wireless, that's sort of been my theme today. And I think he knows that modern mobile network cores are very secure. What keeps him up at night are the aging private networks that are not built on modern mobile infrastructure and legacy public safety networks, critical infrastructure networks, and so on. He's that we've seen become the more frequent victim of attacks, and so I think he's concerned that if public pressure is going to sort of force Congress's hand to take action in a way that may squelch innovation as we're moving into this new sort of landscape of convergence.
Okay, so we've got the importance of open government process. We've got the benefits of wireless for domestic survivors, the importance of security, the role and impact of convergence, and of course, broadband regulation. I've given you all your topics for the halls and the receptions tonight. I just want to say thank you all so much for sharing your insights. Thank you for sticking around and being with us here today. Before I ask you to thank our panelists, I'll say we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for day 2 of our policy program starting at 1 o'clock. And now please let's thank our panelists.